Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to start in on Chapter 3. So this lesson for the Gilded Age and Go West will be the first lesson for our new chapter on Chapter 3. So we are going to start out talking about the Gilded Age. And when you see gilded, that means covered in gold. So this becomes a time of great wealth and prosperity in the United States. People are making a lot of money, either by striking it rich and finding gold. We're going to get a lot of businesses that are going to grow up, and the country itself is going to change. One of the big ways that it's going to change is that there's going to be a lot of movement west in our country as the government tries to go through and settle the lands from coast to coast. So the area that we're going to be talking about is the Great Plains and everything kind of west of the Mississippi River. And it's known as America's last frontier. So the frontier was a term that was used, and it meant a line that basically separated the areas of denser settlement from unsettled territories. So where the cities stopped and where kind of big open land started. So it also was a dividing area, normally where Native American people lived, usually as hunters and gatherers. And these were areas that at this point we had not explored and not gone into. Over time, that frontier is going to shift westward. So it starts out east of the Mississippi, kind of on the other side of the Appalachian Mountains. And then once we get the Louisiana Purchase territory, we start pushing further and further west. And once California becomes a state, it then becomes a goal of the United States to settle the lands in between, so in the middle of the country, so that we would have states going from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. It allowed people who were adventurous an opportunity to escape to the West. You could create a new idea. You could open a new business. You could basically be a new person. And it didn't matter where you came from or what you did. You could have that opportunity if you went west. And a lot of this centered around the idea of manifest destiny. So you can see the picture here of the angel-like woman who is kind of guiding the travelers, and they're all moving west. So this idea of manifest destiny was the belief that the U.S. and the people who lived there were destined to reach the other coast and settle the land. There's a little bit of a problem with that, is that there are people already on it, and that's going to cause some conflicts. So the area that we're talking about at the end of the Civil War that is considered the last frontier is the area I have kind of outlined there in red. So it is the Great Plains, the Rocky Mountains, the Great Basin, desert to the southwest. At this point, after the Civil War, so we're still talking 1870, these are all unsettled territories. So at this point, they're mainly inhabited by Native American tribes. But slowly but surely, the settlers from the east are going to be looking for new land. We're going to get lots of immigrants that are going to enter our country, and their goal was to have land as well. So people are going to take up the call and start pushing westward. So as I said, there is a problem with that, because as we say it's our destiny to settle the areas, these areas already belong to other people, namely Native Americans. So the people we're going to be focusing on a lot are the Lakota, also known as the Sioux Indians, as well as Cheyenne. We're going to have some run-ins with the Apaches, and we've settled a lot and made pacts with the Indians on the East Coast, but that's not been the case with the West Coast. So we're now going to have some conflict that's going to arise because of this westward expansion that the country is trying to do. So the Great Plains is also known as the treeless wasteland. So as you can see from the picture on the left, that when people made it out to the Great Plains, there wasn't a whole lot for them. The soil is really fertile in parts of the north, in the Great Plains, especially in like Nebraska, but it's rolling, treeless plains covered in short, thin grasses. So there's no trees, there's no shade, it doesn't rain a lot, the weather gets crazy, so there are dust storms and tornadoes in spring, and there can be hailstorms in winter. But by 1890, most of the Great Plains is going to be divided into ranches and farms, and a lot of the buffaloes that you see here are going to almost be extinct due to the hunting that's going to be done by the white settlers. So when the Civil War ends and those settlers move west, they start claiming land that already belonged to the Plains Indians, namely the Sioux or the Lakota. And they're going to build homesteads, ranches. We're going to put the Transcontinental Railroad in place. But the worst thing to affect the Indians was the killing of the buffalo. So when people came out riding on the trains, or when they settled in the West, they killed buffaloes for sport, also for the skins. They used pretty much every part of the buffalo. Bones were used to make buttons and needles and different things, and those parts and pieces of the buffaloes would be sent back east to factories. But for Native Americans, this was death. They survived on the buffalo for everything. Basically, there wasn't a single part of the buffalo that didn't get used by a Native American tribe. And one buffalo could last a tribe that wasn't too big, a month. So we get to a point where the buffalo in a very short span are almost nearly extinct. And this is going to greatly affect the Indian tribes in the area. You can see from the picture here, this was a buffalo hide yard in 1878, and that's 40,000 buffalo hides. So just imagine how many Indian families that could feed and for what period of time. And you can see how this was so upsetting and devastating to the Indian tribes that lived in these areas. So when people had to look at settling to the West, there are usually two reasons, and we refer to them as push or pull reasons. So push reasons are factors that push you to leave one place or another. So either take, for example, Jim Crow in the South. So the laws are really bad and I'm being discriminated against. So that would be a push factor. There could be war. There could not be enough food. Religious persecution, wars, those are reasons why immigrants are going to leave Europe and get pushed out of Europe and come to America. Pull factors are things that draw people to a place. So, for example, economic opportunity. When they find gold out in California, people are going to rush there to try to get in on the action in the hopes of striking it rich and finding gold in California, which isn't going to happen for most people. So pull factors that drew people to the Great Plains at this time were the discovery of precious metals, so gold and silver, that's going to be discovered in California and eventually Arizona and Nevada. The Transcontinental Railroad is going to make travel much easier through this area, and it's going to mean that supplies can get there faster. And we're going to take the Native Americans and we're going to relocate them to different areas so people no longer had to worry about the threat of violence from Indians. And the land is going to be ridiculously cheap to the point where in many cases the government is giving the land away. If you had a $10 filing fee, you could get 160 acres. Sometimes they came up with creative ways to give away this land, and we'll show you some of those in class. So the first one, the discovery of precious metals, starts with the gold rush in 1849. So you've heard of California's football team, the San Francisco 49ers. Well, this is where it comes from. So they're the gold miners. We refer to people who struck it rich and went out to search for gold in California, 49ers, because they did it in 1849. So they discover gold in California, silver in Colorado, Nevada, and South Dakota. So people prospected westward. They left and they created mining towns. They clashed with Indians because, especially in the case of South Dakota, some of that gold and precious metals are found on lands that are considered sacred and special to the Native American tribes. So the government's going to have to come in and try to get the Indians off so that the miners can come and take the gold that was in the land. Here's an example of old-time panning. So nowadays, you don't see this unless you get to go to a special place that still does it. I've taken my kids to one of these kind of fun areas where you can go mine for gold, but it was very hard work. It took a long time, and not many people were able to find gold. If you did, you were lucky. Most of the gold was found in the first few months of 1849, and then after that, it was pretty much gone. The second thing that draws people out there is the Transcontinental Railroad. So during the Civil War, the Congress passed the Pacific Railway Act, and the government put land aside to build a transcontinental railroad. So transcontinental meaning from one side of the country to the other. They start construction in 1863, and from the east you had a lot of Irish immigrants that worked, pushing west, and then on the western side from California, you had a lot of Chinese immigrants that came in and then pushed eastward. So they worked from the east and the west and then finally end up joining together and meet in Promontory Point, Utah, and create the first transcontinental railroad. So the two sides meet in the middle in 1869, and now what used to take 6 months by boat now only takes 1 week by train. So prior to completion of this, if I wanted to go from one side of the country to the other, I had to get in a boat and sail all the way around South America and then end up in California. So this now cuts off much of that journey and makes it much easier for people to visit the entire country. So here is the map. So you can see they started on the east in Omaha, and the Irish immigrants pushed west. And then we had the Chinese laborers out in Sacramento who pushed east, and then they met together in the middle in Promontory Point, Utah, which is still a really big tourist attraction. You can go visit it and see where the two sites joined. When the railroad was completed, it meant that it was now easier to move westward. Supplies could be moved from east to west much easier and faster. So farmers and ranchers could ship grain and they could take cattle to markets in the north. So that meant people were making a lot more money and much quicker. And the railroad advertising in Europe and in the US encouraged more people to move west. So now I didn't have to take my family and ride on a covered wagon for 6 months. I could pack everybody up, buy a train ticket, and go out west in a week. So these are some pictures of the railroad being completed. On the left, you have Chinese laborers. So these railroads were all built by hand as they went through and completed this. Amazing that a transcontinental railroad that stretched from coast to coast was done by men with their bare hands over the course of just a few years. And on the right is the picture of the two trains actually meeting at Promontory Point in Utah. So all of this growth is going to spread the country out, and it's going to make our country diverse and settled. We're going to have immigrants from all over, and the land will be divided up into ranches, but we still have a problem that's continuing to grow. This land belonged to somebody else, and we took it. And as we move further into the late 1800s, the government is going to decide that it has an Indian problem. And the U.S. wants the land that the Indians are on, and they're going to either try to negotiate to get that land or they're going to outright take it. So when we go into our next lesson, we'll talk about what conflict happens because of the fighting between the U.S. government and the Indians over the lands in the West. Don't forget to answer the questions at the end of the video, and I'll see you in class.